en bas de l'écran et choisir la langue. Omeima, si tu veux faire l'annonce en espagnol et en arabe, je crois.
السلام عليكم. اسمحوا لي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هذه راهو خالقة الترجمة باللغة العربية وباللغة الإنجليزية والفرنسية والإسبانية. To everybody, please remember that there is translations in Arabic, Spanish, French and English. Para todas las personas que están con nosotros, recuerden por favor que tenemos la traducción en inglés, francés, árabe y español. Pour toutes les personnes qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui, s'il vous plaît, rappelez-vous que nous avons l'interprétation dans le français, l'anglais, l'arabe et l'espagnol. Merci beaucoup à tous.
Merci Omeima. On behalf of the Geneva Support Group for the Protection and Promotion of Human Rights in Western Sahara, I welcome you all to this webinar conference on the situation of the Sahrawi political prisoners, human rights defenders, and journalists under Moroccan occupation. I will spend a few words about the Geneva Support Group that was created in September 2017 on the request of the Sahrawi human rights defenders that were present at the Human Rights Council session. And so it was a small group of 10 people and NGOs around the table that decided to create this group. And today the group counts with...
التي قررت إنشاء هذا المجموعة.
And today the group counts with almost 300 organizations around the world. We choose this subject because the situation, in particular, since the resuming of the conflict last November in Western Sahara, the situation of these people, human rights defenders, journalists, and prisoners, Sahrawi prisoners in the Moroccan jails have worsened. As you may know, some of them have been sentenced to heavy sentence, to life sentence, to 30 years imprisonment, 20 years, 10 years, and very often without material proof, evidence. And most of them have been sentenced only thanks to the recognition they made under torture. And so I will start now giving the floor to Mr. Alfonso Armada, President of the Reporters Without Borders in Spain. Mr. Armada, you have the floor.
Gracias. Buenos días, buenas tardes. Les hablo desde Madrid. Para la sección española de Reporteros Sin Fronteras, es un placer estar aquí con todos ustedes. Personalmente siempre he tenido un compromiso personal, como muchos españoles, con la situación del Sáhara Occidental por razones históricas y de moral política, algo en lo que desafortunadamente muchos políticos españoles, y no solo españoles, no tienen en cuenta, como si descartaran la cuestión ética e histórica como algo inconveniente para las relaciones internacionales y para la llamada Realpolitik. Nosotros personalmente y desde Reporteros Sin Fronteras pensamos que España sigue teniendo una responsabilidad jurídica, histórica, política y moral con la situación del antiguo Sáhara español. Cuando estuve de corresponsal en Nueva York de un periódico español, recuerdo perfectamente ante el Consejo de Seguridad ese mapa del mundo en el que se muestran en rojo los países, las regiones, las naciones todavía pendientes de descolonizar. Y la mancha del Sáhara Occidental es la mancha más grande en ese mapa que está en la sede de las Naciones Unidas. Bueno, desde Reporteros Sin Fronteras, como saben, nos hemos tomado especial interés en la situación del periodismo y de la libertad de prensa en el antiguo Sáhara español, en el actual Sáhara Occidental, porque nos parece una cuestión vital. Como saben, Reporteros Sin Fronteras está especialmente preocupada por la situación de la libertad de prensa en todo el mundo y vemos un deterioro constante de esta libertad que muchos ciudadanos no reconocen hasta que la pierden. Lamentablemente cada vez hay más estados autoritarios en los que la libertad de prensa es una quimera, pero también muchos estados democráticos donde tampoco se reconoce. Fruto de la inquietud de Reporteros Sin Fronteras por la situación del Sáhara, es un informe que se puede ver en la página web de Reporteros Sin Fronteras, rsf-medioes.org. Este informe sobre la situación del periodismo en el Sáhara Occidental se titula Un desierto para el periodismo, porque durante años y años se ha ignorado sistemáticamente la situación del Sáhara Occidental, tanto en la prensa española como en buena parte de la prensa internacional. Por eso hicimos este informe para ver la situación que se está viviendo en la antigua colonia española, en territorios actualmente ocupados por Marruecos y sobre todo para destacar la labor de grupos de periodistas como por ejemplo Equip Media, que corriendo riesgos increíbles están intentando que se sepa en el resto del mundo qué está ocurriendo en el Sáhara Occidental. Este informe ha sido traducido al inglés, al francés y al árabe y la verdad es que nuestros colegas de Reporteros Sin Fronteras en Alemania se quedaron sorprendidos de que algo así estuviera ocurriendo en nuestro mundo. Hay una actitud incomprensible por parte del gobierno español, pero también por parte de la comunidad internacional y sobre todo de Naciones Unidas, que está incumpliendo el mandato de organizar un referéndum de autodeterminación, como el propio nombre de la misión en el Sáhara Occidental, MINURSO, dice. Su misión, su razón de ser, es precisamente que este referéndum se celebre y se convoque. Nos parece inaceptable que se esté jugando el juego de las autoridades marroquíes de dilatar y delatar la cuestión para que al final los hechos triunfen sobre los derechos. Nos parece que esto no es admisible. También me gustaría hacer hincapié en que Reporteros Sin Fronteras tiene una preocupación fundamental, como decía, por la libertad de prensa. Nosotros estamos a favor de los ciudadanos de todos los países y por eso cuando criticamos al gobierno marroquí, no a los marroquíes. Es algo que muchos gobiernos sistemáticamente confunden. Una cosa son los pueblos y otra son los gobiernos y a menudo no tienen nada que ver. Hay muchos marroquíes de buena voluntad que entienden la situación del Sáhara y que cuando intentan hablar de ello son sistemáticamente reprimidos. Se mencionó antes la reanudación de las hostilidades entre el Frente Polisario y Marruecos en noviembre con el incidente en Guerguerat. Bueno, desde que publicamos el informe de Reporteros Sin Fronteras hemos visto un deterioro de la situación en el Sáhara y una crisis que no deja de crecer. En concreto, como recordarán, en las últimas semanas ha habido un agravamiento de la situación entre los gobiernos de España y Marruecos precisamente por la situación en el Sáhara. Esto vino en gran medida determinado por la decisión del gobierno español de permitir que el líder del Polisario, Brahim Ghali, fuera acogido bajo condiciones de respeto precisamente a sus necesidades sanitarias, ser acogido en un hospital español, en concreto en la región española de La Rioja, para ser atendido de una grave enfermedad. Esto fue entendido por el gobierno marroquí como una intromisión, como un acto inaceptable por parte de Marruecos. Nos parece inconcebible también que un acto humanitario de esta naturaleza sea utilizado políticamente por Marruecos. Y como consecuencia de esto hemos visto algo inconcebible que ha sido criticado desde muchas instancias internacionales, que Marruecos abriera las puertas y permitiera que muchísimos inmigrantes y muchísimos jóvenes marroquíes cruzaran a nado a territorio español. Esto provocó una situación desde el punto de vista humanitario muy difícil y muchos de estos jóvenes todavía están en situación muy precaria en Ceuta, precisamente fruto de esta situación tan complicada. También queremos denunciar la actitud del gobierno español porque ha devuelto en caliente, como se dice en la terminología política española, a ciudadanos que tenían derecho, en muchos casos, en su mayoría, a pedir asilo en España. Y sin embargo, con la connivencia también de las autoridades marroquíes, se ha devuelto de forma perentoria a muchos de estos ciudadanos. Otros todavía no han podido salir y muchos están internados en los llamados centros de internamiento de extranjeros, que es una condición legal extraña en la legislación española y que sirve para mantener detenidos a inmigrantes sin haber cometido ningún delito, solo el haber llegado a España. Es otra situación que nos preocupa especialmente. También hemos visto en las últimas semanas y meses un creciente hostigamiento de las autoridades marroquíes hacia periodistas españoles. Hay una larga tradición de expulsión de periodistas españoles legalmente acreditados en Marruecos que, cuando han mostrado interés por la situación del Antiguo Sáhara, han visto cómo las autoridades marroquíes no solo dificultaban su trabajo, sino que les rescindían la autorización para trabajar en Marruecos. Conozco personalmente el caso de periodistas como Carla Fibla o de Luis de Vega, que también vieron cómo se les privaba de su acreditación y no pudieron seguir trabajando en Marruecos, precisamente porque el gobierno marroquí entendía que no estaban actuando éticamente. Y no solo eso, periodistas españoles que informan de forma sistemática de la situación en el antiguo Sáhara español, en el Sáhara Occidental o en Marruecos, también son hostigados sistemáticamente desde el gobierno marroquí o desde agentes pagados por el ejército marroquí para que no informen de forma objetiva sobre la situación del Sáhara. Y entre ellos figura, por ejemplo, Ignacio Zembrero. También tenemos informaciones de que el gobierno marroquí recurre a estratagemas no siempre legítimas ni honestas para persuadir a otros periodistas españoles para que hablen bien de Marruecos. Y hemos visto, con motivo de esta crisis, cómo en intervenciones radiofónicas y televisivas a menudo defienden la idea de que Marruecos es una democracia plena. Lamentablemente no es el caso, como recogen informes como The Economist o de otras instancias internacionales. En la clasificación que Reporteros Sin Fronteras publica todos los años sobre la situación de la libertad de prensa en el mundo, donde analizamos la situación en 180 países, Marruecos ocupa el puesto 136, lo cual quiere decir que la libertad de prensa en Marruecos no vive precisamente un momento de esplendor, y es un requisito fundamental para que una democracia funcione como tal, que haya un respeto meridiano por la libertad de prensa. Y no es el caso de Marruecos. También en las últimas semanas hemos seguido con muchísimo interés y muchísima preocupación la huelga de hambre del periodista saharaui Mohamed Lamin Hadi, que es uno de los presos del grupo de Gedin Isik, condenado en un juicio sin ningún tipo de garantías a 25 años de prisión. Lleva 10 años en prisión y 3 de ellos en aislamiento en la cárcel de Tiflis II, cerca de Rabat. Las condiciones de detención son durísimas y tememos mucho por la vida de este periodista saharaui, condenado, como antes se mencionó, como otros periodistas, en un juicio que no tuvo ningún tipo de garantía y con acusaciones que no se demostraron. El secretario general de Reporteros Sin Fronteras, Christophe Deloire, visitó recientemente Marruecos el pasado 22 de junio y le pidió al rey Mohamed VI la liberación de 2 periodistas marroquíes, Omar Radi y Suleiman Raisoun, que están también en una situación muy precaria en las cárceles marroquíes. Estos 2 periodistas eran periodistas críticos con el régimen marroquí y fueron también condenados bajo un pretexto de índole sexual, que es una práctica que utilizan de forma sistemática las autoridades marroquíes y también las autoridades de otros países que intentan precisamente entorpecer o estorbar o minusvalorar el prestigio de periodistas con este tipo de acusaciones, muchas veces completamente fabricadas. Bueno, todo este panorama lo que nos indica es que en Marruecos hay un interés deliberado en que primero no se sepa qué está ocurriendo en los territorios ocupados. Periodistas españoles e internacionales que han intentado llegar al Sáhara Occidental para contar lo que ocurre allí son hostigados desde el primer momento y a los pocos días, incluso a las pocas horas, son expulsados del territorio, con lo cual la información que tenemos sobre el Sáhara es, como decíamos en nuestro informe, un auténtico agujero negro para el periodismo. Desde Reporteros Sin Fronteras vamos a seguir insistiendo para que se permita que la luz de la verdad, que la luz del periodismo ilumine lo que está ocurriendo ahí, para que se cuenten las condiciones en las que viven los saharauis y también muchos de los colonos que han sido llevados desde el norte de Marruecos para cambiar precisamente el censo con el que en principio tendría que celebrarse el referéndum, tratando de condicionar este referéndum hacia el que las autoridades marroquíes no demuestran ningún interés. Desde Reporteros Sin Fronteras vamos a seguir insistiendo en que se respete la legalidad internacional, que este referéndum se convoque, que las autoridades españolas sigan el ejemplo de lo que hizo Portugal con su antigua colonia de Timor Oriental contra un país tan poderoso como Indonesia, y consiguieron al final que se celebrara un referéndum, y al final Timor Oriental es uno de los países más nuevos de Naciones Unidas porque consiguió la independencia, porque así lo votó la inmensa mayoría de los timorenses. Esperamos que al final en el Sáhara no se imponga la realpolitik, triunfe la justicia, y Naciones Unidas en este sentido tiene un papel muy importante que jugar. Desde Reporteros Sin Fronteras les animamos a todos los que participan en esta sesión, bueno, a que perseveren en su lucha, que nos parece justa y legítima, y nos parece que lo que tiene que triunfar es precisamente lo que el periodismo, el buen periodismo, trata de hacer, que es contar la verdad y evitar los prejuicios ideológicos. Y en esto Marruecos no está ayudando en absoluto. Muchas gracias, es un placer estar con todos ustedes y participar en este evento.
I thank you, Mr. Armada. Indeed, you are right. Western Sahara is a black hole, but not only for journalists. I mean, for the last 6-7 years, there are almost 300 people that have been deported or forbidden to entry Western Sahara. Among them, of course, journalists, but also parliamentarians, lawyers, human rights defenders from international NGOs. And I have to stress, even the Office of the High Commissioner, since last visit in 2015, Morocco has not allowed the officers of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to go back to Western Sahara and to investigate. So thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Mrs. Jimel Galia, Sahrawi human rights defenders, member of the Sahrawi organ against Moroccan occupation, and she is herself a victim of disappearance and torture in the past. El Galia, you have the floor.
Bonjour à tout le monde. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi de remercier le groupe de soutien de Genève. Je vais stopper l'interprétation, s'il vous plaît. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi de remercier le groupe de Genève, de soutien de Genève pour la protection des droits de l'homme au Sahara occidental, de m'avoir invité à participer à cette importante visioconférence qu'il organise à l'occasion de la 47e session du Conseil des droits de l'homme à Genève pour parler de notre situation préoccupante dans les zones occupées du Sahara occidental. Je suis Ghalia Jimmy, militante sahraoui du droit humain et membre du bureau
وعضو
exécutif de
المكتب
l'instance
التنفيذي للمنصة الصحراوية الدفاعية لمناهضة الاستعمار المغربي ASACOM.
Je suis une survivante de la disparition
من الاختفاء القسري وضحية للاختفاءات الفظيعة للنظام المغربي ودفعت قاضيا واختفيت حوالي 4 سنوات بمركز اعتقال سري بالعيون المحتلة بين 1987 و 1991. حالتي ليست وحيدة وليست، لأن آلاف المواطنين اختطفوا وتعرضوا للاختفاء على سنوات طويلة منذ اليوم الأول للاجتياح المغربي، والمئات منهم لا زالوا مختفون، بما في ذلك أمي فاطمة أحمد سال شخصيا بعد تحريري في 1991 إلى هذا
l'intimidation. Je vis sous l'harcèlement, l'intimidation, la diffamation, la surveillance quotidienne, les représailles et la punition collective à mon encontre et à l'encontre de ma petite famille, dont mes enfants sont privés de leur bourse et des études universitaires et de leur réquisition de voyage dont ils bénéficiaient les 100% des étudiants universitaires sahraouis et marocains au territoire occupé, et même de la possibilité d'avoir un travail. C'est d'ailleurs le cas de la plupart des militants sahraouis et de leurs fils, pour une simple raison et une seule, que nous défendons clairement les droits fondamentaux du peuple sahraoui. Le Maroc ne doit pas contraindre la population civile sahraoui sous son occupation avec de la force, de la répression et du terrorisme de l'État pour qu'elle soit marocaine malgré elle. Mais elle devrait nous laisser choisir notre futur politique à travers un référendum libre et démocrate. La communauté internationale devrait s'impliquer positivement et assumer sa responsabilité pour la résolution de ce conflit oublié, pour assurer la paix et la stabilité dans toute la région du Grand Maghreb, du Sahel et du sud de la Méditerranée, dont nous faisons partie. Mon témoignage est un exemple simple de nombreux défenseurs et défenseuses des droits humains, des journalistes sahraouis et des prisonniers politiques qui étaient et qui sont encore les premières cibles de la machine répressive du régime marocain. Mesdames et messieurs les panélistes, chers auditeurs, comme vous le savez, l'Espagne s'est retirée de sa colonie du Sahara occidental avant d'achever le processus de décolonisation et a laissé le peuple sahraoui à son sort face à une occupation illégale militaire et a entamé une campagne féroce de disparition forcée, d'arrestation, d'exode forcé et d'exécution contre la population civile dans les villes sahraouies. Alors qu'en dehors des villes, la campagne était une campagne d'extermination et de génocide flagrant. Les bombardements en napalm et au phosphore blanc interdits internationalement des camps de civils déplacés sahraouis habités par des femmes, des enfants et des vieillards, sans parler des charniers. Tous ces crimes contre l'humanité et crimes de guerre sont restés sans suivi juridique à cause de l'impunité qui continue à persister pour protéger les responsables de ces crimes. Mesdames et messieurs les panélistes, chers auditeurs, depuis la signature de l'accord de cessez-le-feu entre le Front Polisario et le Maroc en septembre 1991, la MINURSO, qui est la mission des Nations Unies pour l'organisation de référendums et la surveillance de cessez-le-feu au Sahara occidental, n'a pas été en mesure de remplir son mandat par lequel elle a été créée, ni de protéger les civils sahraouis des violations et des représailles marocaines. Il faut mentionner que nous, les militants de la cause nationale sahraoui, les défenseurs des droits de l'homme et les journalistes sahraouis dans les zones occupées, nous utilisons la résistance pacifique pour exiger le respect de nos droits fondamentaux, chapeautés par le droit à l'autodétermination, malgré que nous travaillons dans des conditions loin d'être propices pour assurer un travail effectif. Malheureusement, la communauté internationale et les alliés du Maroc, surtout la France, ne voulaient jamais prendre ne voulu jamais entendre notre voix, la voix libre de la société civile sahraoui, sous occupation marocaine. Depuis la création des SACOM le 20 septembre 2000, ces membres du bureau exécutif sont mis sous la surveillance, le suivi et la persécution jour et nuit durant 3 mois, juste après la violation de l'accord de cessez-le-feu par le Maroc le 13 novembre 2020. La répression et les représailles se sont accentuées contre les défenseurs et défenseuses des droits humains et journalistes sahraouis. Et là, à titre d'exemple, le cas de Sultana Khaya, sa sœur Elouara et sa maman Matou, âgée de 84 ans, sont toutes sous un siège écrasant physiquement et psychiquement depuis plus de 7 mois à la ville de Boujour. C'est aussi le cas des autres militantes de la même ville qui se montrent solidaires avec la famille Khaya. D'autres défenseuses et défenseurs des droits humains et militants de la cause sahraoui dans les autres villes telles que El Ayoun ont vécu les mêmes souffrances à cause de la torture et autres peines au traitement cruel, inhumain et dégradant. Le régime d'occupation marocain se venge aussi des militants et surtout des défenseurs des droits humains en limitant leur capacité de se déplacer, mais surtout en les privant des droits les plus élémentaires comme le droit de travailler, avec une politique d'étranglement des moyens de subsistance. Plus que cela, elle utilise son système judiciaire injuste pour juger les militants sur des chefs d'inculpation falsifiés et fausses. Pour cette raison, nous disons toujours qu'il est temps que l'ONU assume sa responsabilité envers le peuple sahraoui et qu'il est temps que le comité international de la Croix-Rouge s'intervienne et applique les dispositions de la 4e Convention de Genève pour visiter les prisonniers politiques sahraouis, dont le dernier d'entre eux était le chef du réseau médiatique Gargarat, le militant Sabi Hdi, qui a été enlevé de son lieu de travail au port à l'ouest de la ville occupée de l'Ayoun le 3 juin 2021 et qui est toujours en détention arbitraire. Mesdames et messieurs les panélistes, chers auditeurs, enfin, nous lançons un appel à la mobilisation de l'opinion publique internationale et en particulier au gouvernement espagnol, car selon l'ONU, il continue d'être la puissance administrante du territoire non autonome du Sahara occidental. Pour mettre fin à nos souffrances et nous garantir l'exercice de notre droit à l'autodétermination et à l'indépendance, nous sollicitons un mécanisme international soit mis en place pour surveiller et rapporter sur les violations des droits humains au Sahara occidental, et que les mesures concrètes et adéquates soient adaptées en faveur du respect des droits fondamentaux des Sahraouis civils dans les territoires occupés du Sahara occidental. De lever le siège de chez Sultana Khaya et sa famille, de libérer immédiatement tous les prisonniers politiques injustement incarcérés dans les prisons marocaines, de garantir des conditions propices pour que les défenseurs des droits humains fassent leur travail aisément et de dévoiler le sort des disparus et mettre fin aux souffrances de leurs ayants droit. Ouvrir l'accès aux territoires occupés pour les solidaires et les observateurs internationaux. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention.
Merci Galia pour ton témoignage. Et en effet, comme tu l'as dit, il y a plusieurs défenseurs de droits humains et journalistes qui actuellement subissent la répression des forces d'occupation marocaines au Sahara occidental. Et parmi celles-ci, Hassan Ahaba, qui est avec nous, et qui fait partie de la Ligue pour la protection, the League for the Protection of Sahrawi Civilian Prisoners in Moroccan Prisons. Hassan, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, the panelists and chairman. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about the situation of the Sahrawi political prisoner in the Moroccan jail. Especially here, we are talking from the occupied territory of Western Sahara, the Sahrawi League for Protection of the Sahrawi prison in Moroccan prison take its responsibility to defend, to highlight the situation of the Sahara political prisoner in the Moroccan prison, especially the Moroccan occupation try always to hide its crime against the Sahrawi political prisoner. First, it should be noted that the phenomenon of the political detention in Western Sahara has appeared since the Moroccan invasion of Western Sahara in 1975 until today, and it will not end till the end of this occupation in the territory. It's varied between the arbitrary detention, the kidnapping, and the enforced disappearance in center secret. As for arbitrary detention, this is the strategy by Moroccan occupation authority to target the human rights activists and the human rights defenders in the occupied territory in order to put an end to the peaceful resistance in the occupied territory. For example, today there are 40 Sahrawi political prisoners in Moroccan jail. They are where they are arrested or they kidnapped and fabricated to charge against them. For example, the last examples, like the case of the militant Ghalib Bouhalla, Mohammed Nafi' Boutasoufra, who were arrested in the 12th February. We have another example, the minor Mustafa Razouk, who were arrested in last March and were condemned for 1 month in prisons. And we have the last example and the big one, it's Sabi Yahdeh. Sabi Yahdeh, he is a journalist, he is the coordinator of the Gargarat media, who was arrested in Laayoune, in the port of Laayoune, the 1st of June. He's arrested just because of his activity as a journalist, as a coordinator of media, as human rights defenders. But the Moroccan authorities always input them by that in determining the external integrity of the state by photographing the military places and the security installation without the consent of the public authorities. So that's the reason made. It means always the Moroccan authority never arrest the human rights activists or the journalists by their cases, the real cases. They just fabricated because they cannot arrest someone because he defends the right for the Sahrawi people for the independence and the self-determination. So that is why the right, when we talk about the right as a political prisoner, are also violated during the arrest. Besides being subject to torture and signing a fabricate police report under threat and duress, and they are facing trial does not respect the condition of the international recognized fair trial. And then after that, after the arrest, the provisional period in the police center, something like stuff like that. After the period of the arrest and the trial, they continue the suffering of the political prisoner. They continue in prison, are directly targeted by and violated them and depriving them of all their legitimate rights as a political prisoner and punishing them inside solitary prison. They call kashu, something in the Moroccan prison, they call it kashu, when they isolate the prisoner. But as a revenge of their activity before and of their position even after their arrest. And for the cashew, we have many examples like Sidi Abdullah Ibha, Yahya Muhammad Hafid Izza, Muhammad Bouriel, Muhammad Bashir Boutengiza, Ahmed Sba'i, Sark Al-Asiri, and the others. So it's like a revenge, it's like strategy to push the Sahara political prisoner. The prevention of the family visit, and the confiscation of the personal needs of the Sahrawi civilian prisoner, as well as the violation of the right to study and academic success. For example, we have in this year the example of Al-Bashir Khadda, Abdul Mula Al-Hafidhi, Abdullah Al-Khfawni. So, if we talk about the right of treatment, the prison administration use always practice a policy of canceling examination appointment for the Sahara political prisoner, and they change the date from time to time with no reason. Sometimes the political prisoners are in dangerous situation, horrible situation, but no one care about them. They told them, okay, the doctor is not here. We change your appointment for 2 or 3 months later. Here we have some examples like Ahmed Sba'i, Ibrahim Ismaili, Sid Ahmed Mjayyed, but especially in this year, the coronavirus pandemic now in the world has a big impact on the situation of the Sahrawi political prisoner, as they have been prevented from the family visit more than 1 year. More than 1 year, no right for visit. It's provided for the family to visit since the first day of the coronavirus in the territory of Morocco, resulting in a shortage of supplies for the prisoner, shortage of clothes, and everything due to the prevention of visitation, and prevent and confiscate priorities sent by their family. Even the things that sent by their family, always the prison administration confiscated with no reason, and from time to time the prisoner doesn't have the right to have a phone call to their family. So it also confirmed that the political prisoners suffering and their suffering it's a double. Why it's double? Because they suffer in the prison, that's first, and the second, they suffer with what happened to their family. The family of the prisoner preventing them from visiting between brackets under humiliating condition. And the distance, we have to talk about the distance also. It's a big suffer, because there is a prison far from them more than 1,200 kilometers from the occupied territory of Western Sahara, and the family opened their arrival, they are prevented. Perhaps the greatest evidence of this suffer, it's the mother of the Sahrawi civilian prisoner Muhammad Lamin Hadi, was prevented by local administration prison in part from visiting her son, that Muhammad Lamin Hadi had open hunger strike, but the administration prison break his open hunger strike by what they call it force feed. So it means until now, till the first day, till now, his mother doesn't know anything about him. She was prevented from visiting him twice in the prison. Until now, more than we are today 2 months with no call, with no information about him, where he is, if he is alive or not. So, and the last few days, I talked to his mother and they asked her if she has any news, any new information. She said there is nothing happened till now, no news about Muhammad Lamin. And Muhammad Lamin, he's just an example of the targeting of the Sahrawi human rights defender in the prison, because the suffering starts from the street in the occupied territory and continue the suffering with you in the street, in the manifestation, in the airport, in the checkpoint between the city, in the and then after the arrest in the Moroccan prison. It should be noted that the situation of the political prisoner has become dangerous, especially after the 13 November 2020, and the direct targeting of which they were the object by the Moroccan prison administration. The humiliating search that happened in exactly the 13th November 2020, the humiliating search which the Sahara political prisoner were subjected in that day, directly after the Moroccan regime attacked the Sahrawi civilians in Gargarat. So with this example of Sahara political prisoners suffering, the League for Protection of the Sahrawi prisoner in Moroccan jail every year try to make a report about the situation of the Sahara political prisoner. And we registered this year, I will share with you just some examples here. The League that registered in 2020 report, for example, and the level of trial, 23 trial against Sahrawi human rights activists and journalists, 15 violation of the right to treatment and cancellation of medical appointment. Again, this year, the continuing of the forbidden to visit for Claude Monjan Asfari, and 29 cases of a cruel form of ill treatment, and 26 hunger strike. When I say 26 hunger strike, I'm talking about the hunger strike for 24 hours till the open hunger strike. Why this 26 hunger strike? Because that show how the political prisoner suffer, and the only way to protect, to demand their right as a political prisoner, it's the hunger strike. So they make their life in danger to get their rights. So in fact, it take a long time to talk about the Sahrawi political prisoner, given the suffering and their family endured due to their struggle for the independence of Western Sahara. So that's why we call all the international community to take an action for the Sahrawi political prisoner. And finally, we would like to refer that the international community of Red Cross assume the full responsibility for the status and the safety of the Sahrawi political prisoner, considering that the Western Sahara now region is certainly witnessing a war between the Polisario Front, the representative of the Sahrawi people, and the Moroccan occupation force in the occupied Western Sahara. We will continue the struggle. We will continue defending the right of the Sahrawi political prisoner. We will continue demanding the freedom for all the political prisoner. We know that the phenomenon of the arbitrary detention will not end until we end the occupation, but during this period, we will continue the way. Maybe us will be as a political prisoner in the future, like our comrade, they were with us on the ground here as a human rights defender. Now they are a political prisoner, and the Moroccan authorities always try to make an exchange. When they release 2 or 3 political prisoners, they arrest 2 or 3 again. When they arrest 1, they arrest 2. So it's like an exchange for the human rights activists in the occupied territory. Thank you very much for this opportunity. We'll continue the struggle peacefully to release all the political Sahara political prisoners. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Asana, for your testimony. And now, unfortunately, Mrs. Gilali was unable to attend at the last minute. And therefore, we invited a representative of CODESA, a human rights organization in Western Sahara, to participate. But they also, unfortunately, could not log in the conference. But they sent a message, and I'm going to read it out. My name is Majoub Maliba on behalf of CODESA. Thank you very much, estimated moderator and estimated speakers, and a special thanks to the reputably participating NGOs for the tremendous work you are doing. I would like to add some data from our reports concerning the human rights situation after the Moroccan breach of the ceasefire agreement and resumption of hostilities in Western Sahara. Concerning Sahrawi political prisoners, who are the most affected group, we have 43 Sahrawi political prisoners serving long unfair sentences and 5 awaiting trials. Many of them are human rights defenders, and some have spent more than 12 years in Moroccan prisons. Almost all of them are illegally imprisoned outside the occupied territory of Western Sahara in Moroccan prisons, far from their families, where they suffer discrimination from both the prison's administrations and the Moroccan prisoners co-inhabiting those prisons. We have reported so far 47 protests in the form of hunger strikes, including the case of Sahrawi political prisoners Mohamed Lamin Hadi, who have had 69 days of hunger strike, 71 cases where prisons administration denied access to medical assistance to Sahrawi political prisoners, 35 cases of maltreatment, and 25 cases of torture and punishment in isolation cells. The Sahrawi human rights defenders are also systematically targeted by the Moroccan occupying forces through regular arbitrary detention, kidnapping, torture, and regularly put under house arrest, the last in the case of Sultana and Awara Khaya for almost 220 days and still ongoing. We have reported at least 95 arbitrary detentions and more than 720 crimes against humanity and grave human rights violations since the breach of the ceasefire on 13 November 2020, including human rights defenders. The media blockade imposed by the Moroccan occupying forces is intensifying, and Sahrawi journalists are systematically targeted when reporting on the human rights situation in Western Sahara. Example of Yadi Esabi of Gargarat Media Network, who is still under arrest in occupied Dakhla, with very limited and restricted access to lawyer and family visits. Those figures reflect the human rights situation in the occupied territories of Western Sahara and its dramatic deterioration. We should highlight the alarming misuse of the COVID pandemic circumstances and the resumption of war to impose restrictions on Sahrawi human rights defenders and independent journalists, and to violate very single human rights and freedom, which makes the need for an international mechanism for the protection of Sahrawi civilians more emergent than ever before. Therefore, we would like to kindly ask the participating international NGOs to coordinate a joint action plan to, 1, intervene with the UN Human Rights High Commissioner and the concerned special mechanism of the Council to liberate all Sahrawi political prisoners, to organize a joint visit to the territory in fact-finding mission, and finally, to produce a joint report on the general human rights situation in Western Sahara. And here we offer our full support and cooperation to facilitate data collection. So this was the message of representative of CODESA. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Adam Shapiro, Head of Communication and Visibility with Frontline Defenders. Mr. Shapiro, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. My presentation will be about human rights defenders in Western Sahara, which is the focus for Frontline Defenders. And you've heard already some of the information, certainly, from our esteemed colleagues here. Sahrawi human rights defenders and their families in Western Sahara continue to be subject to ongoing harassment and reprisals by the Moroccan authorities. There has been an increase in such reprisals over the last few months, and particularly since the eruption of military tensions between the Moroccan army and the Polisario Front in November 2020 over the legal status of the territory. The crackdown also appears to have intensified following US recognition of Morocco over the territory of Western Sahara in early December 2020. Sahrawi human rights defenders, including their family members, are being subjected to imprisonment, surveillance, physical, and verbal violence. The authorities have also imposed arbitrary restrictions on defenders' movements, placing the private homes of many prominent human rights defenders under siege, and in some cases cutting electricity supplies to their homes. Security forces have also used excessive force to disperse peaceful protests, which human rights defenders have participated in. Sahrawi defenders continue to be subjected to inhumane treatment and medical negligence. What follows are cases on which frontline defenders have documented and advocated. The imprisonment of Sahrawi human rights defenders following unfair trials has continued. For example, Khatri Dada, a 22-year-old human rights defender belonging to the Salwan Media, a group of Sahrawi media activists located in the city of Samara in Western Sahara. On 24 December 2019, he was arrested in Samara due to his human rights work. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison by the Court of First Instance in Laayoune on charges of attacking police officers and destroying public property. However, the evidence used against Khatri was the confession of the human rights defender had been forced into signing while being detained. The evidence also included images of a masked person retrieved from an alleged video that neither the defender nor his lawyer had been able to see. They have not been given full evidence to the evidence file either. The sentence was subsequently confirmed, and eventually he was transferred to an unknown location, which began the process of him being transferred repeatedly. He's finally ended up far away near the city of Agadir in a prison called Ait Madoul, 624 kilometers away from Western Sahara. He's been held in overcrowded cells and has for 9 months been forced to sleep on the floor. This is just one example of many imprisoned human rights defenders who suffer from particularly inhumane conditions. Another human rights defender on which we've reported, Yahya Mohammed Al-Hafid Haza, was held in solitary confinement for almost 12 weeks, and his health has deteriorated rapidly as a result of these unsatisfactory conditions in which he is being detained. The human rights defender's asthma has been aggravated by unhygienic conditions, and he also suffers from rheumatism and kidney disease for which he has not received appropriate treatment. As you heard earlier from our colleague here, women human rights defender Sultana Khaya has been under house arrest in her home in Bujdour since November 2020, a measure which was imposed without a court order or a legal basis. On November 19, 2020, several Moroccan police units imposed a siege around her house, during which the woman human rights defender was subjected to physical and verbal assaults. Police vehicles continued to block the entrance of her home. On several occasions, while trying to leave her house, the woman human rights defender was physically assaulted and forced to retreat back inside. On February 13th, there was an escalation when she was physically assaulted after a member of the Moroccan police threw stones at her, which left her face bleeding and badly bruised. The police would not allow her to be transferred to a hospital. Moreover, on 12 May 2021, several masked Moroccan security agents raided her home and sexually assaulted her and her sister. This was the second raid on her house in 48 hours. The assaults and the attacks continue on her home. Security agents also detained Babu Azid, Mohammed Saeed Labhi, and two student activists, Saleh Baber and Khalid Boufreya, who were staying in her house. They were violently detained, handcuffed and blindfolded, and spent almost 4 hours in an unmarked car, where they were reported being subjected to severe physical abuse, resulting in several injuries. Babu Azid, Mohammed Saeed Lapi, and the two student activists were subsequently left by police in a rural area 60 kilometers from the city a few hours after they were detained. Moroccan security forces continue to surround the house of human rights defender and president of the Sahrawi Association for the Protection and Dissemination of Sahrawi Culture and Heritage, Bashri Ben Talib, in Western Sahara. On several occasions in January and February 2021, the police blocked the entrance to his home and physically attacked and insulted him and members of his family. On April 3rd, 2021, Ben Talib was severely beaten by members of the police at the bus station in the city of Laayoune while he was on his way to visit Sultana Khaya, the woman human rights defender mentioned above. Another woman human rights defender, Mahmouda Bamba Lafkire, and her family are being subjected to continuous intimidation by the Moroccan forces. On 25th January 2021, her 17-year-old daughter was stopped by a plainclothes policeman who proceeded to question her for approximately 1 hour until her mother intervened. The police officer threatened to detain the woman human rights defender for trying to ameliorate the questioning of her daughter. On 28 November 2020, Moroccan security forces attacked the house of prominent human rights defender and co-founder and leading member of Qudessa, Ali Salam Tamek, in the city of Laayoune while he was hosting a traditional Sahrawi family event. Some members of the Moroccan security forces threw rocks at his house, terrifying his family and guests. After his election as the president of the collective of Sahrawi human rights defenders in Western Sahara, Qudessa, on 28 September 2020, human rights defender Babouazid Mohamed Sidi Labihi has been banned from entering his workplace in the port of Dakhla, Western Sahara. According to the human rights defender, Moroccan authorities have threatened fishing companies operating in the port in order to prevent them from employing the human rights defender. Moreover, he has been reported being under physical surveillance since December 22nd, 2020. He was physically attacked subsequently on 28th April 2021 while he was visiting Sahrawi human rights defender and activist Said Ibrahim Khayam, whose family's house in the city of Bahador has been under siege by Moroccan security forces for more than 5 months. On 20th December 2020, women human rights defender and civil servant Mbaraka Alina Baali was arbitrarily transferred to another workplace administration in Al Masra, some 30 kilometers away from the neighborhood where she had been working and living with her family since June 2013. The decision of her transfer was taken without her prior knowledge or approval. She also reported that she's been under continuous physical surveillance since early February 2021. What these cases demonstrate is the total control over the lives of Sahrawi human rights defenders by Moroccan forces, and the use of the judicial system as a means of targeting and silencing human rights defenders. Frontline Defenders is concerned with the safety of human rights defenders around the world, particularly those human rights defenders who have limited access to resources, including free access to the international community. Frontline Defenders maintains that human rights defenders are essential actors in defending and advancing human rights, bringing about positive change in their societies and securing justice. As such, Frontline Defenders advocates to ensure their protection and the ability to freely carry out their legitimate and peaceful human rights work as enshrined in international human rights law, the UN Human Rights Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, and other international and regional mechanisms. As such, Frontline Defenders calls on Morocco's international partners to urge the Moroccan authorities to prioritize the protection of human rights defenders in Western Sahara, and in doing so, to first cease targeting all human rights defenders in Western Sahara and guarantee in all circumstances that they are able to carry out their legitimate human rights activities without fear of reprisals and free of all restrictions, including judicial harassment. Second, to immediately release imprisoned human rights defenders who have been sentenced following unfair trials for their peaceful human rights work and quash their prison sentences and ensure that the treatment of Sahrawi human rights defenders while in detention adheres to the conditions set out in the body of principles for protection of all persons under any form of detention or imprisonment adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1988. Third, remove all restrictions on the free movement of Sahrawi human rights defenders and their families and cease all further forms of surveillance or harassment against them. And finally, carry out an immediate, thorough, and impartial investigation into the physical assaults against Sahrawi human rights defenders with a view to publishing the results and bringing those responsible to justice in accordance with international standards. Now, I realize after hearing the testimony and reading these cases that we have and the well-documented experiences of human rights defenders in Western Sahara, this list of demands may sound a little bit like wishful thinking. However, these should be understood as kind of like the basement, the bottom floor of where the international community must pressure the Moroccan state to adhere to its commitments under international law, under agreements in the United Nations, and basic respect for human rights in the occupied territories of Western Sahara. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Shapiro, and through you, I would like to thank Frontline Defenders for the work done in relation to the situation of human rights defenders in Western Sahara. Thank you very much. Maintenant, je vais passer la parole à Monsieur Elias Gaufret de l'Action chrétienne pour l'abolition de la torture et en lui transmettant le message des interprètes qui demandent de parler un peu plus lentement pour qu'ils puissent suivre dans leur interprétation. Monsieur Gaufret, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Merci aux organisateurs d'avoir invité la CAD France à participer à cette rencontre. Je salue également les autres participants ainsi que les interprètes pour leur travail qui nous permet d'échanger aujourd'hui tous ensemble et de nous comprendre, évidemment. Donc voilà, la CAD France intervient sur la question des droits humains au Sahara occidental depuis 2011 environ, avec notamment ma prédécesseuse de l'époque, à savoir Hélène Leget. Notre action s'est beaucoup concentrée sur les cas des prisonniers du groupe de Gdemizig, qu'on a déjà mentionné au cours de cette présentation, et qui sont prisonniers pour la plupart d'entre eux depuis 2010, et nous sommes tout particulièrement concentrés sur le cas de Nama Asfari, également déjà mentionné, qui est l'un des membres de ce groupe. Donc la CAT, avec les avocats des détenus sahraouis, s'est également engagée dans leur défense, que cela soit durant les procès devant les autorités américaines, devant les instances judiciaires marocaines, mais en lançant également des plaintes devant les tribunaux français, notamment sur le cas de Nama Asfari et de son épouse Claude Mangin-Asfari, et en saisissant également plusieurs mécanismes des Nations Unies. Pour rappel, l'affaire de Gdemizig remonte donc au 8 novembre 2010, quand des hommes sont arrêtés dans le cadre du démantèlement par les forces de sécurité marocaines du camp de Gdemizig, qui est à quelques kilomètres. Voilà, ce camp rassemblait alors plusieurs milliers de Sahraouis venus installer leur tente traditionnelle à proximité de la ville de Laayoune, dans le Sahara occidental, afin d'exprimer leur exaspération quant aux discriminations économiques et sociales qu'ils subissaient, et qu'ils subissent encore, malheureusement. Cet événement est un événement majeur de la société civile sahraoui et est d'ailleurs considéré comme un signe annonciateur du printemps arabe, puisqu'il a intervenu quelque temps après la révolution tunisienne et égyptienne par la suite, et il montre une mobilisation importante, une mobilisation de masse de la population et des jeunes en particulier dans le Sahara occidental. Ce rassemblement est également l'occasion de revendiquer, évidemment, le droit du peuple sahraoui à l'autodétermination, alors que le Maroc occupe depuis 1975 ce territoire qui est considéré au regard du droit international et de l'ONU comme non autonome, ce qui a déjà été rappelé évidemment précédemment. Malgré la montée des tensions durant ce camp, qui avait commencé plusieurs semaines auparavant, notamment avec les forces de police, le rassemblement se déroule néanmoins dans une relative se déroule de manière relativement pacifique, et un dialogue est même noué avec les autorités marocaines qui débouche sur un accord de principe le 4 novembre 2010 où le royaume s'engage justement à répondre progressivement aux demandes des manifestants. Et alors que la mise en œuvre de ces mesures devait débuter justement le 8 novembre 2010, ce même jour, les forces de sécurité marocaines interviennent brusquement à 6h30 du matin pour démanteler le camp et entraînant de ce fait des affrontements avec les jeunes sur place. Suivant l'annonce de l'intervention de la police et des violences qui s'y produisent, une situation chaotique s'installe à Laayoune, avec des affrontements entre manifestants sahraouis d'une part et forces de sécurité, groupes de résidents marocains de l'autre. Le bilan de la journée est assez lourd, avec des centaines de blessés, 13 morts, dont 11 policiers marocains et plus de 300 Sahraouis arrêtés. La répression continue pendant plusieurs semaines après les événements, et ce que l'on appelle désormais le groupe de Gdemizig, composé de 25 militants politiques et de défenseurs des droits, dont 19 encore en détention, sont particulièrement ciblés par les autorités. Ce groupe est envoyé à la prison militaire de Salé, près de Rabat, où ils sont condamnés à de très lourdes peines le 16 février 2013 par un tribunal militaire. Les condamnations ont toutes été prononcées sur la base d'aveux obtenus sous la torture, à l'issue d'un procès inique, marqué notamment par le refus d'entendre les témoins cités par la défense et d'enquêter sur les allégations de torture. D'ailleurs, la Cour de cassation marocaine annule en juillet 2016 le jugement pour défaut de preuves et absence d'identification des victimes et ordonne d'ailleurs une nouvelle procédure devant la Cour d'appel de Rabat suite à l'adoption récente d'une loi interdisant de juger des civils devant des tribunaux militaires. Ce qui est intéressant, c'est que les éléments de preuve sur la présence des accusés, les moyens utilisés lors des affrontements sont défaillants, ça, la Cour le reconnaît, et ainsi Nama Asfari, une des principales figures politiques sahraouis, avait été arrêtée à Laayoune, la ville non loin du camp, la veille même du démantèlement du camp. C'est-à-dire qu'il n'avait pas pu participer aux actes qu'on portait contre lui. La justice marocaine n'a cependant pas cherché à établir les faits, mais plutôt à démontrer la responsabilité d'individus qui lui ont été désignés en amont par les autorités marocaines. On a ainsi des coupables, mais pas de vérité sur ce qui s'est passé au cours de ces affrontements. Et surtout, ce qui est important, c'est que la Cour de cassation n'a pas cassé le jugement de 2013 pour usage d'aveux obtenus sur la torture. Et ça, c'est un point fondamental, puisque pour cette raison, et à la suite d'une saisine par la CAD France notamment, le Maroc est condamné le 12 décembre 2016 par le Comité contre la torture de l'ONU, qu'on appelle le CAT plus simplement, sur le cas spécifique de Nama Asfari, qui était le porte-parole du camp en 2010, le CAT a condamné le Maroc pour les sévices que Naam Asfari a subis pendant son arrestation, la prise en compte des aveux forcés par le juge militaire et l'absence d'enquête malgré les réitérations par Naama de ces allégations de torture. Alors, c'est évidemment un message fort parce que c'était la première fois que le Maroc était condamné par le comité contre la torture. Et malgré ce signal fort, un nouveau jugement en juillet 2017 par la Cour d'appel de Rabat prononce à nouveau de lourdes peines, toujours sur la base d'aveux forcés et d'absence d'enquête indépendante sur les allégations de torture. Le lendemain du jugement, sur la base d'informations notamment transmises par la CAT France et d'autres militants, les rapporteurs spéciaux de l'ONU sur la torture, la protection des défenseurs des droits de l'homme, les rapporteurs également sur l'indépendance des magistrats, ainsi que sur la liberté d'expression, et enfin sur le groupe de travail sur la détention arbitraire, font tous ensemble une communication aux autorités marocaines pour les alerter sur les violations des droits humains et les conditions du procès pour ce qui est du groupe de Gdé Musique. Donc, à nouveau, on a un message fort qui est envoyé par un nouveau mécanisme onusien. Et donc, malgré cela, en janvier 2018, enfin, pour cette raison, en janvier 2018, Naam Asfari reçoit le prix de la Fondation ACAT France 2017, qui est remis à son épouse Claude Morgin-Asfari. Et c'est important de le signaler parce que les détenus et leurs familles subissent régulièrement des représailles et des mesures punitives en raison de leur détermination à obtenir justice, comme des restrictions, droit de visite, mise en isolement, surveillance policière des proches, etc. Donc, ces représailles continuent encore de nos jours. On l'a bien vu notamment avec le cas de Mohamed Lamine Hadi. C'est aussi le cas spécifique de Claude Morgin-Asfari, donc l'épouse de Naam Asfari, qui est interdit du territoire marocain et donc de rendre visite à son mari Naam Asfari depuis octobre 2016. Elle n'a obtenu qu'une seule visite en janvier 2019 suite à une grève de la faim de 30 jours. Et depuis cette visite en janvier 2019, elle a refait une tentative de visite qui a été rejetée, enfin elle a été refoulée. Et depuis, avec la crise du Covid-19, évidemment, les restrictions de visite ont empêché toute visite de sa part. Et donc on espère qu'avec l'amélioration progressive de la situation pourrait évoluer, même si le contexte général, avec la reprise, la fin du cessez-le-feu, nous laisse peu d'espoir à ce sujet. Ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'alors qu'on allait marquer les 10 ans du démantèlement du camp de Gdé Musique en novembre 2020, donc il y a à peu près 6 mois, la Cour de cassation finalement se rappelle qu'il y a encore un jugement à donner et rend son jugement final quelques jours après l'anniversaire, en confirmant à nouveau la décision de la Cour d'appel de juillet 2017, faisant fi des observations des experts onusiens avec des peines allant de 20 ans de prison à la réclusion, et de 20 ans de prison à la réclusion à perpétuité. Donc là, tant la décision du CAT que les communications des experts onusiens est mise de côté, puisque finalement, elle continue de s'appuyer toujours sur des aveux obtenus sous la torture. Du coup, la CAT France, évidemment, avec ses partenaires, continue donc son travail avec les mécanismes onusiens pour le suivi de la situation des prisonniers de Gdé Musique. On continue ainsi d'interpeller les autorités françaises et européennes sur la situation des droits humains au Sahara occidental et dans les prisons marocaines, et cela à travers différents appels relayés par les membres de la CAT, comme ce fut le cas récemment avec l'agression du défenseur Hassan Abba, présent aujourd'hui avec nous d'ailleurs. Et enfin, la CAT France, en partenariat avec la RAST aussi, c'est un projet intéressant, mène un programme justement de parrainage entre des militants français et des prisonniers sahraouis et leurs familles. Alors, pour rappel, la RAST est l'association des amis de la République arabe sahraoui démocratique. Ce programme permet ainsi à nos membres et ceux de la RAST d'exprimer leur solidarité et au soutien aux victimes et à leurs proches, tout en envoyant un signal aux autorités marocaines, comme quoi ces prisonniers ne sont pas oubliés et continuent de faire l'objet de mobilisations internationales pour leur libération. Et donc, comme Amnesty, la Ligue de protection des prisonniers politiques sahraouis et d'autres ONG et d'autres militants, le cas de Mohamed Lamine Hadi nous interpelle particulièrement en ce moment, car depuis l'arrêt forcé de sa greffe de la faim, la détérioration de sa santé, sa famille est sans nouvelles de sa situation, ce qui est particulièrement préoccupant évidemment. Et d'ailleurs, à ce titre, Mohamed figure d'ailleurs parmi les victimes mises en avant durant la nuit des veilleurs, qui est un événement de mobilisation organisé par la CAT France chaque année le 26 juin, donc qui a eu lieu samedi dernier, qui est donc, pour rappel évidemment, la journée internationale pour le soutien des victimes de la torture. Et donc voilà, je voulais vous montrer un petit peu comment notre travail a été fait justement sur le cas des prisonniers de musique et aussi comment ce travail est fait pour prendre en compte la situation des défenseurs des droits humains sur les territoires sahraouis. Je peux répondre à d'autres questions si vous en avez et je vous remercie pour votre attention. Merci beaucoup.
C'est moi qui vous remercie pour votre présentation et à travers vous, la CAT France pour ses activités concernant les défenseurs des droits de l'homme sahraouis. Et last but not least, I will give the floor to Mrs. Tone Surfon, jurist and member of the Norwegian Committee, Support Committee for Western Sahara. And I would like to ask you, since it is only 3:15, and we have at least an half an hour following the request of the interpreters to speak more slowly than the precedent panelist. I thank you. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Gianfranco, and thank you very much for inviting me to this important side event at the UN side event. And my name is Tone, I come from Norway, and I operate as an international legal representative on behalf of several local Sahrawi human rights defenders and Sahrawi political prisoners, ranging from the case of Sultan and Luara Kaya that we have heard about today, to a group of young imprisoned students and Sahrawi journalists, including Katri, remaining behind bars as punishment for their work of documenting and reporting on human rights violations. We all know and have witnessed a clear pattern of abuse by the Moroccan authorities targeting Sahrawi activists deemed to be sympathetic to the Western Sahara issue. The latest documentation by the UN Special Procedures came in a joint communication issued by the UN Special Procedures of January 2021, supported by numerous joint communications issued in the past, documenting a systematic and widespread persecution of Sahrawi human rights defenders in the occupied territories, the muffling of any media activism, and the crackdown on Sahrawi journalists, in addition to the situation of that of Sahrawi political prisoners. As for the situation of Sahrawi political prisoners, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention have provided vital documentation as to the imprisonment of Sahrawi activists, supporting the right to self-determination. In the decisions rendered, a systematic pattern of the arbitrary arrest of activists without any outstanding prior arrest warrant, the practice of torture and usage of confessions signed under torture, and the subsequent imprisonment of Sahrawi activists following political prosecution can be traced. The decisions rendered by the working group cover over 22 individual cases. The opinions rendered by the working group can thus be said to establish a legal precedent for the arbitrary detention of Sahrawi activists arrested in response to their support for the right to self-determination, whilst documenting the systematic practice of Morocco imprisoning Sahrawi activists as punishment, but not only against them, but also against their entire family and community, intended to muffle all movements. The latest decision rendered by the UN Working Group relates to the case of Walid Saleh El-Battal. Walid is a young Sahrawi journalist belonging to the Sahrawi journalist network Smara News. In response to his work as a journalist, he would be arrested on 7 June 2019 on his way to the reception of, at that time, just released Sahrawi political prisoner Salah ad-Din Basir. He would be subjected to a violent assault in the car he was driving before being dragged into a police car and subjected to torture. He was also forced to sign confessions, later used against him as the only piece of criminal evidence. Walid would first be sentenced to 6 years in prison by the first instance, before he was sentenced to 2 years by the appeal courts. And in February 2021, a decision was published by the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, holding that the detention of Walid was arbitrary. This decision was particularly important as it was the first decision when the working group held that the Moroccan court had not been independent nor impartial when dealing with the case of a Sahrawi journalist, with the working group clearly denouncing the fact that the only reason for the arrest and imprisonment of Walid was his work as a Sahrawi journalist with Smara News. After 2 years of arbitrary detention, Walid was finally released from prison on 7 June 2021 after having served his sentence. The decision of the UN was, in other words, not implemented by Morocco, as is also the case for the young imprisoned students, including Aziz, Mohammed El-Kantawi, and Abdelmoula, in addition to Mohammed El-Bambari, whose detention has also been found to be arbitrary by the UN Working Group. The most alarming case may be the Gedemesig prisoners, having been arrested, tortured, and imprisoned in response to their activism and participation in the Gedemesig camp, having been held under arbitrary detention for over 10 years. Not to mention the case of Sahrawi human rights defender Yahya Mohammed El-Hafid Iassa, having been imprisoned for over 13 years. Following the end of the ceasefire between Morocco and Front Polisario on 13 November 2020, the situation for imprisoned Sahrawi activists had dramatically worsened, and even more so after the December 10 proclamation by the former US president. Already in November 2020, the prisoners that I represent informed me of how they were experiencing increased isolation, increased threats and intimidations and ill treatment coming in direct response to the escalation of tensions in the conflict. I remember very well the day when Walid's father called me and informed that Walid had received threats in the form of, "You are between our hands. You will suffer greatly for what the separatists are doing." The crackdown has, however, not only been felt by the prisoners, but it has also been felt greatly in the occupied territories, with the widespread crackdown having been carried out against Sahrawi human rights defenders and journalists in response to their vocal advocacy, but also their work of documenting, reporting, and denouncing. It is my opinion that the violence exerted by the Moroccan occupying forces, and as witnessed during the last months, is being carried out with the aim of silencing the call for the right to self-determination and to muffle all movement in the territory, and maybe even more worrisome, with the aim of shutting down the territory, leaving it pitch dark. The darkest example remained to this day the case of Sultana and Louara Kaya. Sultana and Louara have been under house arrest since November 2020. Since then, Sultana and Louara have been subjected to physical and psychological violence almost daily. They're kept locked inside their own home, surrounded by Moroccan police, blocking the streets and front door. On May 10th and again on May 12th, the situation escalated itself when dozens of hooded agents broke into the Kaya home before dawn as the family slept. In the first raid, they rampaged through the home and arrested 3 activists. In the second raid on May 12th, the police raiding the home raped both Sultana and Louara with shoes and sticks, assaulted their brother, and poured a foul-smelling noxious liquid all over the house, furniture and clothes that made the home almost uninhabitable. From our involvement as lawyers for Sahrawi women living under the Moroccan occupation, we know that sexual violence is nothing new. Sexual violence against both sexes carried out by representatives of the state has its own undertone of sadism in a toxic cocktail of physical and psychological violence and social repression. The purpose is to dishonor the woman, to silence her with a weapon that leaves the victim in anxiety, confusion, and fear of new abuse. This also remains the very reason why the Moroccan occupying forces is using this very kind of violence against Sahrawi female human rights defenders. Sultana and Louara is not alone in their experience, but they remain of the few daring to go public. Just yesterday, I asked Sultana if she had a message that she wanted me to convey during this side event, and she told me, We need protection. We can't keep on and on. Morocco wants to isolate us, to send us into exile. We don't have any protection. We are alone. They're using checkpoints in the neighborhoods. They're using cranes to surround us. After 12th May, it's just gotten worse. It's unbearable. You must do something. You must come. The suffering is absolute. Morocco will kill us in the end. As the UN General Assembly, as late as December 2020, pointed out, the suppression of the right to self-determination, the situation of an alien occupation and foreign domination, constitutes at the very heart of it all, the very denial of all human rights. In other words, the suffering of the Sahrawi people can only be mitigated by the end of the Moroccan occupation and the fulfillment of the right to self-determination for the people of Western Sahara. While waiting for this to happen, we must, however, address the second most urgent issue, which is the placement of the international community and the UN at the sideline. As Sultana so precisely put it, we are alone. We don't have any protection. Or as another Sahrawi activist told me a few weeks ago, the only way to help the people of Western Sahara is to hold Morocco accountable for the crimes committed. If the international community fails to do so, the repression will only escalate. For this very reason, it is vital that we place close attention and use every means possible to hold Morocco accountable, including by the sending of a technical mission to the occupied territories, sooner rather than later. Thank you very much for your time.
I thank you for your presentation and for your testimony, for transmitting the testimony of the Sahrawi human rights defenders under occupation, and also for the work you're doing through the special procedures of the Human Rights Council. And with this, we have 15 minutes left. So I don't know, I open the floor to any comment or question from the participants. If any, please click on the little hand at the bottom of the screen. Or just raise your Regina. You want to say something? Please, you have the floor.
Well, yes, well, what is frustrating, I think, for all of us is that
Sorry, Regina, maybe just to introduce yourself.
Okay. Okay, I'm Regina Ditzold. I'm from the German organization Freedom for Western Sahara, and we work mainly on the political ground. We are a very small organization, but we always go towards Berlin because we believe that Berlin and Paris have to talk about Western Sahara. I have been to the occupied territories together with Claude Mangin in 2013 for a 2-week tour. So I've heard what is happening there, and it's aggravating for sure. I think what's frustrating for all of us that Morocco, excuse the word, is giving a shit to what the international community, what the human rights defenders say, what the UN says, whoever can say what they want. Morocco, the politicians don't give a damn. They just don't care because they feel they are the best and they can tell us what we have to do. And the question is how we can break through with this, because this is really, I mean, we've seen what happened with the people in Ceuta. We now know they are they don't talk. They don't talk to Germany, they don't talk to Spain anymore, and they expected that everybody follows this funny deal that Mr. Trump pronounced. And I think they have a terrible, terrible, terrible way of looking at things in regard not only to human rights, not only in regard to respect of laws and everything. So what can we do there?
Yes, thank you, Regina. Yes, of course, that's why we set up this Geneva group to strengthen the work in the UN, in particular with the special procedures, but also through other organizations of the UN families, also the International Committee of the Red Cross. But of course, the work has to be developed also in the capitals. And as you said, Berlin, Paris are very important, Brussels, of course, but also Washington and New York. And I mean, in all the capitals of the 27 members of the EU, because we know that the decisions are taken with the full consent of all the members, and when you have one member that does not agree, you can block a decision. That's why it is important that there are some very important capitals, but the work has to be developed in all capitals. I don't know if there is anyone who wants to add something or raise the questions to the panelists. If this is not the case, I would like just to thank, of course, the panelists and the interpreters, but also all the people who assisted to the web conference. Thank you very much to all, and see you soon. Oh, Maria.
Hi, hi, Gianfranco.
I don't see, but I hear.
I don't know why, but it's not allowing me to activate my camera. But I did send a question via writing, but I can read it to you. And it's for Adam Shapiro, although anyone is also welcome to address it. And it's, what do you think international human rights organizations such as Frontline Defenders
Maria, we lost the end of the question there.
Yeah, I can read the question of Maria. Is what do you think international human rights organizations such as yours can do to raise awareness on Western Sahara, especially in the United States, and given that US recognition of Moroccan sovereignty in Western Sahara seems to have emboldened the occupying forces to violate human rights with such impunity? So,
I mean, in terms of Frontline Defenders and other human rights organizations, I think, you know, from what we do, focus on the human rights defenders angle, which is our mandate, constantly raising up the cases of the violations of human rights defenders, monitoring the situation, and giving a platform for Sahrawi defenders to have access to diplomats, to, you know, the special rapporteurs, etc., and working in the system in that way is certainly something that Frontline and other human rights organizations are doing. I think, as a previous speaker mentioned, the question is, to what extent does the Moroccan government care very much about that? That said, we do know that the Moroccan government does care about its international image. I can certainly say that whenever we present a case of a Sahrawi defender and take it up for advocacy, we do hear from the Moroccan embassy in Ireland, where Frontline Defenders is based, and they push back on our information and try to discount or discredit the defenders or the organizations that we rely on for that information. So it's not that we put something out and there's no response. There is a response. It's often an attempt to denounce and to deny. So that does show that there is, it's not quite that the government doesn't care, it's that the question is, what will it care about and what steps of effective pressure can be made to change the reality on the ground. And I think that's where the issue of what is Washington willing to do, in particular Washington, comes into play. Now, Frontline is not, despite my accent, I am in the United States, but Frontline does not actually have a formal presence in the United States. So that would be left to other organizations, and unfortunately our colleague from Amnesty is not here today. I would say that with the new administration, however, in the United States, there should be an opportunity to change the equation somewhat, but we haven't yet seen that. We haven't yet seen the Biden administration take concrete steps to undo the damage that has been done, not just with Western Sahara, but with Palestine, with other places as well around the world, where particularly this deal that seems to have been struck by the Trump administration has led to so much damage. And that's where I think pressure needs to be ramped up, is to get the United States to get back to the table, the international table, outlined by the United Nations, and to which the United States was committed to at one point, and get them back on that track. And that's where I think pressure can be made with this administration, unlike with the previous administration. But also, in Europe, getting the European Union through its various mechanisms and relationships with the Moroccan government to also leverage that pressure and to make some sort of cost to the ongoing occupation of Western Sahara and perpetration of crimes against its people, that needs to start happening. Europe needs to step up, whether it's in the human rights field, the business field, or other forms of economic or security cooperation to leverage its power it has vis-a-vis the Moroccan government.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there are any other comments or questions. You can click on the small hand at the bottom of the screen, or just open your video. Nicole, I see. Please introduce yourself.
Oui, Nicole Gagné, je suis secrétaire générale de l'Association des Amis de la République arabe sahraoui en France. Et je voulais poser une question par rapport à ce que le Haut Commissariat des Nations Unies pour les droits de l'homme a décidé réellement de faire au Sahara occidental. Est-ce qu'il y a une mission qui va être mise en place? Comment voilà, est-ce que vous pouvez préciser cela?
Oui, alors juste le lundi dernier, le jour d'ouverture de la session du Conseil des droits de l'homme, suite à l'intervention de Timor-Leste, demandant à la haut-commissaire d'envoyer une mission d'observation dans les territoires. Elle a répondu en salle donc, du Conseil en disant que le Haut-Commissariat continue de surveiller les violations des droits de l'homme de loin. Ça veut dire que pour l'instant, de toute façon, il n'y a pas l'accord du Royaume du Maroc pour que les fonctionnaires du Haut-Commissariat visitent à nouveau le territoire. Mais on sent quand même que la préoccupation monte au sein du bureau de la haut-commissaire par rapport à ce qui se passe dans le territoire, et notamment le fait que justement les autorités marocaines ne donnent plus l'accord pour faire une visite.
Mmh. Ouais.
Donc pour l'instant, ils suivent de près la situation, de près dans le sens à fur et à mesure que les informations arrivent, mais en même temps de loin, c'est-à-dire à partir de Genève.
Oui, d'accord. Merci pour l'info. Merci. C'est pas très enthousiasmant, mais voilà.
Oui, bien sûr, c'est très difficile. De toute façon, les agences des Nations Unies ne peuvent intervenir qu'avec l'accord de l'État qui exerce le pouvoir sur un territoire, légalement ou illégalement. à moins que, effectivement, le Conseil de sécurité ne prenne d'autres dispositions par rapport à la situation.
Gianfranco, si vous me permettez, deux mots. Gianfranco, please, can I say two?
Oui, bien sûr.
Just for one question, that the international community should be very worried about what's happening in Western Sahara, especially how the corruption has interfered in the implementation of the resolutions of the UN by the Security Council. The lack of political will is one of the biggest problems to implement any kind of initiatives in Western Sahara, including finding a way to protect the Sahrawi people, finding a way to implement international humanitarian law, finding a way to speak out about what's going on in Western Sahara. And the international community, especially the international organizations, they should be having more voice in demanding the UN to implement its resolutions faithfully and to stop using double measures in relation to Western Sahara. So it's really unacceptable how they are very voiced in questions that are not so urgent, like what's going on in Western Sahara, and they are so silent about the torture, the rape, the plunder of the natural resources, the violations of all kinds in Western Sahara. So we really urge all these organizations to be more advocate more, to speak more about what's going on in Western Sahara. The Sahrawi people are very peaceful people. We are not asking anyone to help us to buy weapons or to buy, to give us whatever. We have never used the terrorism as a way to advocate or to show what's going on in Western Sahara. So the Sahrawi people must be rewarded in somehow. And this reward can be implemented by giving them some kind of protection while the international community find a political solution. So it's time to do justice in Western Sahara. And the Sahrawi people has paid a big price about the silence and about the incompetence of the persons who are working in the UN. Thank you very much. I am Umayma Abdeslam. I work with the Sahrawi people.
I thank you, Umayma, for your message. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment or raise a question? If not, we can close this webinar conference. Again, thank you very much to the panelists and the interpreters, and also all the participants to the conference. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.